held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the State of UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday. Arirang.
U.S. President Donald Trump says progress is being made in peace talks with Iran, claiming he had received a, quote, big present from Iran. His comments come as strikes continue across the Middle East. And Qatar Energy has declared force majeure after missile strikes damaged key LNG facilities in Ras Laffan. The disruption is affecting long-term gas supply contracts, including shipments to South Korea. And South Korea is moving to shield its economy from the fallout of the Middle East crisis. Seoul is launching a prime minister-led emergency economic task force to coordinate the government response. We begin with the claims of progress in peace talks with Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump says Tehran even sent him a present, saying it shows Washington is dealing with the right people. The comments come as strikes continue across the Middle East. Park Gun-woo leads our coverage tonight.
Israeli forces launched a wave of strikes on infrastructure in Tehran from Tuesday night into Wednesday. Iranian state media says the Revolutionary Guards responded with a new round of attacks on targets in Israel, as well as U.S. bases in the region including Kuwait and Jordan. Drones hit a fuel tank at Kuwait International Airport, causing a fire, while an Iranian missile strike also wounded at least 9 people in central Israel. Iran also said a projectile struck the grounds of its Bushehr nuclear power plant, calling it a renewed attack by the U.S. and Israel. Despite the ongoing conflict, U.S. President Donald Trump said Tuesday that talks with Iran were ongoing, adding that Tehran is eager to reach a deal. In fact, Trump said he had received a present from Iran worth a huge amount of money without revealing what exactly it was.
It was oil and gas related, and it was a very nice thing they did, but what it showed me is that we're dealing with the right people.
However, Tehran has denied that any negotiations are underway, vowing to continue its fight. According to the New York Times, Washington has delivered a 15-point proposal to Tehran through Pakistan aimed at ending the conflict. The proposal reportedly includes dismantling Iran's nuclear capabilities, halting uranium enrichment, and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, the U.S. is moving additional forces to the region, raising concerns of further escalation. Thousands more U.S. Marines were on their way to the Gulf, and the Army was preparing to deploy at least thousands of troops from the 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East in the coming days. With fighting ongoing and diplomacy uncertain, attention is focused on how and when the conflict might come to an end. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
As uncertainty continues, Britain is calling for international action to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as concerns grow over global energy supplies. South Korea is among the countries backing those efforts. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Oh Soo-young, covers this effort.
Britain is pushing to move forward on international efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as concern grows over the prolonged disruption to one of the world's most important oil shipping routes. On Tuesday, The Guardian reported London has offered to host a security conference on reopening the strait. The summit could be held in London or at a naval headquarters in Portsmouth, with the aim of building a broader coalition and enough momentum to open a safe route when the time is right. The defence official cited by the paper made clear the effort under discussion is not for the height of the fighting, but for after major combat has eased. Sitting above the strategic waterway, Iran has effectively closed Hormuz to all but approved vessels. while the United States has pressured its partners to help reopen the strait militarily, which key allies have rejected. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said allies are discussing how best to reopen the strait without announcing any immediate deployment. A UK-led joint statement last week has now expanded to 30 signatory countries, including South Korea, Australia, and the United Arab Emirates. The updated British government text says they're ready to support appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage and welcome countries already engaged in preparatory planning.
Right now, most countries are trying not to appear as though they'll join U.S. military operations. They're aiming for some kind of arrangement with Iran through negotiations to secure safe passage. So statements like this are just enough to signal that they're not all opposed to the U.S. That seems to be the guiding principle and the limit of most countries' actions.
Seoul, for its part, has been sustaining diplomacy. In his call with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi on Monday, South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun called on Tehran to halt attacks on civilians and civilian facilities in Gulf states, and to ensure safe navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. On Tuesday, he also held talks with Oman and Kuwait on energy supply, economic security, and the safety of South Korean nationals and vessels in the region. Cho is expected to continue those discussions in France, where he is attending the expanded session of the Group of 7 Foreign Ministers meeting of 2026, while also holding bilateral talks with key counterparts. Oh Si-young, Arirang News.
In related news, missile attacks on Qatar's energy facilities have disrupted LNG exports, prompting Qatar Energy to suspend several supply contracts, including with South Korea. Seoul is now coordinating with Gulf partners to secure alternative energy supplies. Lee Seung-jae has the story.
Qatari state-owned energy company Qatar Energy has declared force majeure on long-term liquefied natural gas supply contracts with South Korea, China, Italy, and Belgium after missile attacks damaged key energy facilities. Strikes last week targeted installations belonging to the company in Ras Laffan, disrupting operations and affecting approximately 17% of Qatar's exports. The clause allows companies to suspend contractual obligations when unforeseen events make performance impossible. Qatar's energy minister said repairs to the damaged LNG facilities could take 3 to 5 years. With energy supplies already affected by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, South Korea has moved to strengthen diplomatic coordination with Gulf partners. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun held phone talks with Oman's Foreign Minister Badr bin Hamad Al Busaidi on Tuesday and requested cooperation in securing alternative supplies of liquefied natural gas and crude oil. During the call, Cho also thanked Oman for its support for the movement of South Korean peacekeeping troops deployed in the region, as well as for its help evacuating South Korean nationals after the outbreak of hostilities at the end of February. The Omani foreign minister noted that major infrastructure across Gulf countries has suffered damage from recent Iranian attacks and called for Seoul's continued interest and support. Both sides agreed to deepen bilateral ties and cooperate in efforts to restore peace and stability in the Middle East. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea is stepping up its response to cushion the economy from the impact of the Middle East crisis by creating an emergency economic task force. Our top office correspondent Song Yu-jin reports.
South Korea is stepping up its response to help cushion the economy against the impact of the Middle East crisis. At a briefing on Wednesday, Prime Minister Kim Min-seok announced the launch of an emergency economic task force.
With the conflict in the Middle East continuing for more than 3 weeks, its economic impact, including energy and raw material shortages, is expanding. The Emergency Economic Headquarters, led by the Prime Minister, is an upgraded and expanded version of the existing Emergency Economic Ministers meeting.
The task force will bring together the finance, industry, health, and foreign affairs ministers, as well as the chairperson of the Financial Services Commission. Each will oversee a dedicated response team. It will support the implementation of key measures discussed at emergency economic meetings chaired by President Lee Jae-myung.
With the emergency economic meetings chaired by the President serving as the top control tower, we will mobilize all available national resources. To support this, the government will respond as one team through the Emergency Economic Headquarters.
It is set to begin operations next week and will meet twice weekly. The announcement comes a day after President Lee called for an emergency response system, warning of growing uncertainty in the supply of crude oil and natural gas amid the conflict in the Middle East.
민생과 경제산업 전반에 발생할지 모를 중대한 위기에 대처하기 위해서 정부 차원의 비상대응 체계를 선제적으로 가동해야겠습니다.
As part of the efforts, the Blue House told reporters on Wednesday that it is setting up what it calls an emergency economic situation room to work in coordination with the emergency economic headquarters. Headed by Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Eun-sik, the Situation Room will consist of 5 response teams that will oversee their counterparts at the PM-led task force. 송미진, Arirang News.
South Korea has launched its domestically produced supersonic fighter jet. President Lee Jae-myung called the launch of KF-21 a springboard toward the country's vision to become the world's top 4 global defense powerhouses. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min has the story.
It was a decade in the making, and President Lee Jae-myung hailed the first delivery of a KF-21 as a symbol of South Korea's aspiration for self-reliant defense over more than half a century.
KF-21의 양산을 통해 마침내 우리 대한민국은 땅과 바다에 이어 하늘에서까지 우리 기술과 의지로 평화를 지키는 무기를 보유하게 됨으로써 자주 국방의 위용을 떨치게 됐습니다.
He was speaking at a ceremony on Wednesday at the Korea Aerospace Industries headquarters in the southern city of Sacheon to celebrate the launch of South Korea's new supersonic fighter jet, produced using its own technology. The event was attended by related officials, foreign ambassadors, and private firms.
KF-21의 성공을 대한민국 방위산업 4대 강국 도약을 향한 든든한 발판으로 삼을 것입니다.
The commander-in-chief highlighted the jet's outstanding performance and low maintenance costs. He vowed to spare no effort and investment in nurturing the nation's defense industry and share know-how with its partners.
나아가 협력국의 세계 최고의 무기 체계뿐만 아니라 우리가 가진 기술과 개발 과정의 경험을 함께 공유하여 K-방산의 경쟁력을 더욱 높여갈 것입니다.
South Korea reportedly plans to sign a contract with Indonesia to export 16 KF-21 fighter jets. Since the blueprint was unveiled in 2001, the country officially launched the development project in 2015 and successfully completed its final flight test in January. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The South Korean Navy submarine Dosan Ahn Chang-ho left the peninsula on Wednesday to take part in a joint exercise with the Royal Canadian Navy in the first trans-Pacific deployment for Korea's naval submarine. The 3,000-ton vessel is set to sail 14,000 kilometers to Esquimalt Harbor in Victoria, arriving in late May before conducting combined drills with Canada in early June. It will then join the U.S.-led RIMPAC exercise in Hawaii later that month. The mission will mark the first Pacific crossing by a South Korean Navy submarine and its longest voyage on record. The Navy says the deployment is meant to underscore both the submarine's operational capability and cooperation between the South Korean and Canadian navies. Latest data for the month of January show a subtle yet tangible shift in South Korea's demographic portrait, with both the number of newborns and marriages on the rise. Kim Do-yeon has the latest numbers.
South Korea's demographic landscape saw a bright spot at the start of the year, with births and marriages both posting double-digit growth. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Wednesday, 26,916 babies were born in January 2026. That is an 11.7% jump from a year earlier and the highest volume for any January in 7 years. Following 9 consecutive years of decline since 2016, January births have now recorded double-digit growth for 2 straight years. The total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have near the 1.0 mark, rising by 0.10 on year to 0.99. This increase was primarily driven by women in their 30s. Notably, the proportion of firstborns rose to 63.5%, while the shares of second and third children shrank. However, officials urge caution before calling this a permanent reversal.
January is typically a month with an exceptionally high number of births. Over the past decade, January has accounted for roughly 9.7% of the annual total. So, while the numbers came out strong with a large on-year increase, whether this trend will continue is another matter.
Marriages, a leading indicator for future births, also surged. The country saw 22,640 registered marriages in January, up 12.4% on year. This marks the largest volume for the month since 2018 and the third highest growth rate for a January since 1997. Meanwhile, deaths fell 17.6% to 32,454. The agency attributed this sharp drop to a base effect from last year when harsh weather conditions caused a spike in fatalities. Consequently, the nation's natural population decline slowed to 5,539. However, major cities like Seoul and Incheon bucked the national trend, recording natural population growth. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Over half of South Korea's top 500 listed companies by revenue posted an on-year rise in operating profit last year. According to data research firm for CEO Score, total operating profit for the 254 firms included in its analysis rose almost 24% on year in 2025, reaching a combined 228.27 trillion won. SK hynix posted the largest increase, followed by Samsung Electronics with a combined operating profit of some $61 billion, up over 61%. Their gains accounted for almost 79% of the total increase. The remaining 252 firms posted simply around a 7% increase in operating profit. In other news, streaming service Netflix says its live coverage of BTS's free comeback concert that took place at Gwanghwamun Square this past weekend captured over 18 million viewers. Lee Eun-jin tells us more.
Netflix says 18.4 million people worldwide tuned in to watch BTS comeback live Arirang on Saturday. The figures include people who watched the initial live stream, as well as those who streamed the performance again within the following day. According to Netflix on Tuesday, the show ranked in the weekly top 10 in 80 countries, while reaching the #1 spot in 24 countries, including South Korea, Mexico, Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Bulgaria. Netflix also reported that its concert-related content has reached 2.62 billion global social impressions to date, solely on its official channels, while numerous hashtags linked to BTS and Netflix trended around the world. This was their first time reunited as a full group in nearly 4 years, showing that their influence has only intensified over their hiatus since their last concert in October 2022. The members had left to complete their mandatory military service. The Gwanghwamun Square concert precedes the K-pop megastar's sold-out world tour, set to cover 34 regions from Singapore and Tokyo to Munich and Los Angeles between April 2026 and March 2027. The tour will commence on April 9th in Goyang, South Korea. Netflix also added that their documentary BTS The Return will premiere on March 27th, presenting an unprecedented behind-the-scenes look at RM, Jin, Suga, J-Hope, Jimin, V, and Jungkook regrouped for their latest album release. Lee Eun-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's historic Jongmyo Shrine has been selected as the official face of the 48th meeting of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee in Busan this coming July. An official emblem, newly unveiled by the Korea Heritage Service earlier this Wednesday, features the grand sweeping tiled roof of Jongmyo's main hall, the country's first heritage site. The design reportedly symbolizes the preservation of 600 years of royal tradition, as well as global connections, peace, and cooperation. Daejeon City, often called South Korea's city of bread, is drawing crowds with a unique taxi service for bakery lovers. The bread taxi takes visitors on a guided tour of the city's most famous bakeries. Jo Young-eun was there.
The city of Daejeon has turned its downtown bakeries into major tourist attractions, drawing visitors into a unique culinary experience. At the center of this trend is the so-called bread taxi, a unique ride that guides passengers through the city.
The bread taxi launched last November and gained popularity among bread enthusiasts as it tours famous bakeries around Daejeon City.
이 택시 운행은 어떻게 시작하시게 된 건가요?
I created this service for people who love Daejeon's bread. I hope it becomes a bucket list experience for all bread lovers in Korea, and, if I may be ambitious, for people all around the world.
The driver greets passengers at the station with a big smile, accompanied by bread-themed dolls. Passengers receive a welcome kit that includes a guidebook to Daejeon's bakeries, along with tasting plates, utensils, and wet wipes. Visitors are pleasantly surprised by the menu-style guide and foldable tables similar to those on airplanes. The taxi's first stop is a bakery that's famous for its egg tarts.
에그 타르트 3개만 더 줘.
2개. The driver tracks each bakery's opening hours and baking schedules, ensuring passengers can enjoy freshly made pastries without waiting long lines or missing them altogether.
이 집에서 에그 타르트 다음으로 맛있는 게 얘예요. 피자.
맛있겠다.
피자빵. 이건 나중에 집에 가서 에어프라이어로 데워 먹어도 돼요.
A stop at one of the city's largest bakeries fills visitors with excitement as they show their passion for discovering new flavors. The driver explains the best menu items at each bakery, along with tips on how to best enjoy and store different types of bread and pastries. He even recommends unique pairings such as ramen and kimchi rice bowls.
네, 조합이 너무 좋아요.
Passengers savor each combination at their own pace, fully enjoying the experience as they eagerly try the driver's top recommendations.
Once I got on, the driver was so kind, it felt almost like being with family, so I could relax, enjoy the bread, and have a great time.
As a city renowned for its rich bakery culture, Daejeon is attracting more and more visitors with these unique tourism experiences. Jo Young-eun, Arirang News, Daejeon.
It's been unusually mild lately. Temperatures are about a month ahead of the average. But we do have a large day-to-night temperature swing of around 15 to 20 degrees, so make sure to dress in layers. Air quality is still a big concern. Ultra-fine dust levels will stay bad nationwide. Under clear skies, dry weather advisories are in place. Meanwhile, there are wind and wave advisories for waters off Jeju-do Island through late this afternoon, and for the eastern South Sea and waters south of Jeju-do into early tomorrow. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 7 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 4 degrees, Jeju at 10 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 19 degrees, Chuncheon at 22 degrees, Busan at 18 degrees. We'll keep this mild and sunny spring weather through this week, with rain expected in the south and Jeju-do Island next Monday. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
And that's all we have for tonight. Thank you for watching. This was Kim Mo-gyan filling in for Kim Dami. I'll be back with Within the Frame at 8:30 p.m. Korea time, so stay tuned.
Are you curious about Korean cultural heritage?
If you are a fan of Korean culture and history, listen up. Korean cultural heritage is based on a 5,000-year history.
The whole country is like a massive museum because it possesses such diverse cultural properties. Let's not wait any longer and take a look.
First, for beginners, for those who are not familiar with Korea, let's start with the world-famous list.
You can see how Korea's beautiful traditional patterns and historical features have been preserved.
And don't forget to experience Korea's intangible cultural heritage. From Gangang-sulrae to Talchum, there's just so many exciting cultural heritages to experience.
These are for intermediate level tourists who have already visited Korea and its famous attractions. You might even be standing in a World Heritage Site right now.
How about searching for intangible cultural heritage that you can experience? 한소리, 제주 해녀 diving, 김장. Make some unforgettable memories while having fun.
Last but not least, the advanced level. It's the memory of the World Register. Korea possesses an extensive documentary heritage. Korea is serious about documentation and preservation.
A tour of Korean cultural heritage will become a legacy of your own.
Why not make your own Korean cultural heritage travel itinerary?
Isn't it fascinating?
내가 지키고 있던 가끔 떠오르면 괴롭던 난 망가질 차례가 됐어 넌 모르게 난 빌었지 다 망가지라고 그러면은 함께 할 수는 있겠지 내 이름도 가끔 어렵지만 빈 그릇과 반찬통을 세기 바래버린 하얀 소나타를 매일 습관처럼 되뇌이며 살고 싶어
Knock knock! The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Poli Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? 물론 쉽지 않은 여정.
With the mysterious life forms Daejeon by your side, you can become a Daejeon master and save humanity like a total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-Animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. North Korea is once again sending a series of strong political and military signals. At the Supreme People's Assembly on March 22nd, Kim Jong-un reaffirmed a hostile policy towards South Korea and again insisted that North Korea's status as a nuclear-armed state is not open for negotiation. At the same time, Pyongyang carried out military activities during the South Korea-U.S. Freedom Shield exercise, including drills simulating a breakthrough in South Korea's defense lines. The meeting also brought changes inside the leadership, raising questions about the regime's internal dynamics and future strategy. So what message is Kim Jong-un sending to Seoul and Washington, and what could it mean for security on the Korean Peninsula? For more on this, we are joined in the studio by Go Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. A big welcome, Dr. Go.
Good to see you.
And also joining us online is Edward Howell, lecturer in the International Relations at the University of Oxford. Very good to see you, Dr. Howell.
Very, very good to be here.
So let's start a discussion right away. First with Dr. Go. Like I've mentioned, Kim Jong-un has reaffirmed a hostile policy towards South Korea. How did you read into that?
Well, Kim Jong-un mentioned in his speech that any kind of provocation by South Korea will be met with a merciless response. And clearly the aggressive language is very strong on the part of North Korea. But then what's interesting about it is that North Korea had threatened South Korea with quote-unquote merciless or overwhelming response several times already. So the message has been reaffirmed, so in a way kind of stale by now. So I think we should read between the lines here. So ultimately, the power to be that can threaten the regime at the moment is not South Korea, but in fact, it's actually the United States. So, but then at the same time, there's the conflict by North Korea when it comes to its own approach towards Washington. Washington for North Korea is a counterpart of potential diplomatic breakthrough, but at the same time, it's a major source of threat. So I think what North Korea is trying to do here is, by exaggerating its language, the aggressive language towards South Korea, essentially is trying to send a message to Washington. I think Kim Jong-un is especially concerned about what's going on in the Middle East. So the major decapitation operation that the United States carried out against Iran, I think probably drove a very strong a message or signal to Pyongyang. And clearly, North Korea is a regime that puts priority, the utmost priority when it comes to protecting the leadership. So I think even though the chance of the United States carrying out a unilateral surprising decapitation operation against North Korea is pretty much close to nil, I think it's something that the North Korean regime has to take into consideration. So they want to send a message to Washington, but they don't want to, for instance, completely burn the bridge about the possibility of engaging President Trump with dialogue. So I think they're sending a very strong message to South Korea, but it's really meant for the United States.
So the message is kind of directed at Washington. Yeah. But even though with the harsh words, it's really the concept of the two hostile states was really not disclosed and formally written into Constitution. Some analysts say this could be an attempt to maximize strategic ambiguity. Dr. Howell, how do you see this?
Yes, I mean, I think what is clear now is that this is not new as a result of the recent Supreme People's Assembly, right? As of December 2023, January 2024, the renunciation of peaceful reunification of the two Koreas by Kim Jong-un made very, very clear that enmity with Seoul is now permanent. And Kim Jong-un said this explicitly, at the Supreme People's Assembly. This is a clear signal to Lee Jae-myung that actually supposedly that Lee Jae-myung's initiatives of reconciliation and so-called peace between the two Koreas is not going to work, and that North Korea, I mean, even before the recent Supreme People's Assembly, Kim Yo-jong denounced this as an appeasement offensive. I think what's important here is that North Korea's relations with the South are much, much bleaker than those with the US. As Dr. Go mentioned, Kim Jong-un has not shut the door to the US completely. The door may be ajar by a very small amount. You know, we saw Kim call the US a terrorist state, for instance, in light of what's been happening, in Iran. But there is really no interest on the part of North Korea vis-a-vis South Korea. I mean, even if we speak about any potential, and this is a real potential, Trump-Kim dialogue, neither side really needs South Korea now compared to 2017 or 2018 because they've met before.
So it's really about Pyongyang and its message to the Washington. And when we talk about that, Kim criticized what he calls a U.S. aggression, but he did not really point out President Donald Trump directly. And he again said North Korea's status about nuclear possession is not up for negotiation. How would you read into this, Dr. Go?
So clearly it's a diplomatic statement by North Korea. It's a signal that, it's not even a signal, it's a very clear message directed at Washington. So first of all, we have to, when we're parsing out this statement, clearly they are expressing, essentially they are making a general condemnation of what the United States has done in a way to express solidarity with the Iranian regime. But it's not quite reached the level of expressing strong condemnation. What I mean by this is that it's a condemnation, but at the same time, it's not a warning that the United States that they shouldn't repeat such an action, decapitation operation against North Korea, as I had remarked earlier. But at the same time, as Dr. Howard actually mentioned, leaving open the possibility of engaging in dialogue with the United States. So it's a very ambiguous statement, but at the same time, it actually reflects a dilemma on the part of the regime. And I think this is, in fact, in a way, it's a hedging strategy by Pyongyang. I think North Korea understands that there's certain downside risk, in fact, a very significant downside risk when it comes to engaging President Trump in diplomatic negotiations, given the unpredictability and sometimes impossible demands that President Trump puts on the table. But at the same time, I think there's a realization on the part of Kim Jong-un that ultimately the power to be that can guarantee the regime survival is not going to be China, it's not going to be Russia, it has to be the United States. So I think it really, there's a possibility for North Korea to reach out to Washington, and I think that this is a tentative approach by Pyongyang to reach out to President Trump, and at the same time, they are putting on the table what kind of agenda item they want to have if the two sides are going to engage in the conversation eventually.
Then, alongside those remarks, North Korea also carried out a series of provocations during the South Korea-U.S. Freedom Shield, including drills simulating a breakthrough of South Korea's defensive lines. And Kim even spoke of completing preparations for war. Dr. Howell, what do you think these kinds of moves from the North actually suggest?
Well, there's a lot of continuity here. I mean, we know that North Korea, even before Kim Jong-un came to power under the rules of Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, that Pyongyang has never liked military provocations, what it calls military provocations, from the United States and from South Korea, all the way back to when Team Spirit, for instance, and Fall Eagle commenced. Just two examples here. And the idea of North Korea preparing for war and using the rhetoric of war is nothing new. I mean, in the 1990s, when North Korea threatened to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1993, again, this language that its withdrawal was in response to the US and South Korea preparing for war was very present. But I think now we're at a stage when, yes, as Dr. Go mentioned, Kim's ultimate goal is regime survival, but there is also another ultimate goal for Kim Jong-un, which is recognition of North Korea as a nuclear-armed state. And what we see is that Kim Jong-un wants to be the one who decides, firstly, whether to engage with the US or not, secondly, how to engage with the US, but thirdly, also to dominate South Korea, I think. Now, I think when this rhetoric of peaceful reunification being renounced was made clear by Kim Jong-un, this was peaceful reunification that was renounced. Kim said very clearly that reunification under the conditions of war, where North Korea could absorb, annex, or reclaim South Korea, would still be a possibility. And I think what we see here is the North Koreans and Kim Jong-un making very clear that, yes, peaceful reunification is ruled out, but actually absorbing South Korea, even using latest technology, is very much on the agenda here. I think we also need to bear in mind that if any symmetry between Kim Jong-un and Trump were to happen, and Trump could grant, intentionally or not, Kim Jong-un's request and recognize North Korea as a nuclear-armed state without North Korea giving anything in return, this would be a victory for Kim Jong-un, and that's always at the back of his mind.
Right, so it seems as though it's kind of a strategic way of trying to get the upper hand when negotiation situation comes. Now, Dr. Go, when we look at the internal politics in North Korea, Kim Jong-un has been reappointed as chairman of the State Affairs Commission, while Choi Ryong-hae has stepped down, signaling a generational shift. What do you think this impact would be?
Well, I think it's a natural change of guards within the North Korean regime. We have to remember that Choi Ryong-hae is pretty old. He's 76 years old, so almost double the age of Kim Jong-un. So it was about time for the new generation to come in. But I don't think the new generations are pushing the old generation out. Clearly, Choi Ryong-hae had this mission and role of smoothing out the transition of power between the Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un himself. But having said that, he's done his job and he's actually on his way out. But then the new generation that coming in is represented by somebody like Jo Young-won, who's now succeeding Choi Ryong-hae's previous position as the chairman of the Supreme People's Assembly's permanent committee. So in that sense, I think there's clearly a difference between Jo Young-won, the successor to Choi Ryong-hae, who's actually leaving the post. So Jo Young-won is very interesting. He's in fact a career party apparatchik, so it doesn't. Actually, he only owes to Kim Jong-un for his promotions and success. So it's not like Choi Ryong-hae, who had a stake in the North Korean regime independent of Kim Jong-un. So Choi Ryong-hae belongs to the foundational family of North Korea. So in that sense, he had his own fiefdom, his own power base, so to speak, which, well, relatively speaking, in North Korea, clearly there's only one power, and that's Kim Jong-un. But nonetheless, Choi Ryong-hae has some sort of autonomy that Jo Young-won completely lacks. So if this is any guide, if Jo Young-hae's ascent is any guide, Kim Jong-un is trying to appoint people or characters who are everything to himself but nobody else. So in that sense, I think in a way this is a completion of the slow power transition process that Kim Jong-un was engaged in ever since he came to office back in 2011. So I think what we're going to see, if this interpretation is correct, for Kim Jong-un is going to show more of his personality in his policies, in the North Korean policies, perhaps more so than now. So for instance, Kim Jong-un could be more radical in his approach towards the United States, could be more impulsive, and could be also more impatient. I think Kim Jong-un could, for instance, really push forward with appointing his own daughter, Kim Joo-hae, as the heir to the throne, which is quite a challenge, a risky move on the part of Kim Jong-un in a very traditional society such as in North Korea, as well as make a breakthrough in perhaps in diplomatic relations with the United States. So in that sense, I think this is an interesting change on the part of the North Korea, but at the same time, we shouldn't read too much into it either, because this, I think, is a natural generational transition process as well.
So we'll be able to see more of Kim Jong-un's leadership in the coming days. Now, staying with the reshuffle, one figure that's drawing a lot of attention is Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un. She was promoted at the party congress in February, but she was included in the new lineup of the State Affairs Commission. Dr. Howell, how should we interpret that, and what role could she be playing moving forward?
Thank you. Well, Kim Yo-jong clearly risen up the ranks of the North Korean elites reasonably quickly. given a new role, so no longer the deputy director of the propaganda and agitation department, which she had been involved with for over a decade now. I think this new role she's been given, very little is known about it, but what we see is that she has become a kind of gateway to Kim Jong-un, and I think this is something that's very important here. I think we also need to, as Dr. Go mentioned, bear in mind the question of succession, but we shouldn't speculate about it too much. There's been a lot of speculation about Kim Joo-ae versus Kim Yo-jong, what might happen in the event that that Kim Jong-un becomes unable to fulfill his role as supreme leader. I think actually in the very immediate term, we know that Kim Joo-ae is very young. Rumors have abounded that Kim Joo-ae has been given some kind of responsibility over decisions relating to weapons and missiles. I mean, she is still extremely young. She has no experience. Kim Yo-jong, however, has much more experience. And I think we need to pay closer attention to Kim Yo-jong, particularly given instances that have happened in the past few years. And I'd just like to highlight one. When her brother was incapacitated owing to coronavirus, she was the one issuing statements on his behalf, even more vitriolic than he would do. And I think this is something very much to keep alert with, without undue speculation, particularly with respect to Kim Yo-jong versus Kim Joo-ae, the aunt versus the daughter.
Right, definitely. So it's kind of early to jump into conclusions right now. Now, let's moving back to diplomacy. Kim Jong-un said North Korea will strengthen its ties with traditional partners like China and Russia. What direction do you see his relations moving forward with them?
Well, clearly, one of the noticeable changes that took place in North Korea's external relations has been, I would say, rapprochement or like a restoration of relations between North Korea and China. It was only 2 months ago when it seemed like the North Korea was unhappy with China. For instance, when North Korea enlisted the leaders around the world who sent congratulatory messages, New Year messages to Kim Jong-un. North Korea placed the greeting from the Russian President Putin at the top of the list. And when it came to China, the North Korean media didn't mention President Xi's name, Xi by name, but instead just mentioned the greeting from China. So there's that actually originated speculation that the relationship between Pyongyang and Beijing was still pretty negative. But now we are seeing that when it comes to, and in contrast to whatever is going on between the two, the leadership between the two countries, at the ground level, when it comes to substantial economic exchange level, there are concrete, tangible progress. For instance, we know that, I think it's going to come up soon, but the train linkage between the two countries has been restored, first time in 6 years, and after it was actually shut down during the corona quarantine. So, and then also it's likely that this is going to lead to more exchange of people, but also chance for North Korea to send more of their workers to China so that they can send the remittances back to North Korea for foreign exchange earnings. So there are all these like a positive improvements taking place between the two countries. And I think at this point, the North Korea policy, this actually indicates that North Korea is trying to approach the uncertain future that North Korea is facing, especially in regards to the uncertainty surrounding its potential diplomatic breakthrough, with President Trump. So there's also speculation that North Korea would explore possibility of negotiating with the United States with an eye on lifting the sanctions that are currently in place against the country. But now that they are going to rely more on China and consistently, in addition to consistently relying on Russia, chances that North Korea wouldn't require having to negotiate or like improve relations with Washington to find the economic lifeline. So, and then if that's the case, then as North Korea is going to stick to a hardline stance towards Washington as well as Seoul.
When we stay with the context of North Korea and China, North Korea has resumed passenger train services with China too for the first time in 6 years, expanding exchanges in border areas. Dr. Howell, what does this signal about its border policy and economic strategy?
So more broadly, I mean, we have seen North Korea diversify its economic relationship. Okay, I mean, China, Russia. I mean, Kim Jong-un and meeting leaders in Southeast Asia as well. I think that's something that's important to bear in mind. With respect to China, China is North Korea's most important economic lifeline, and Beijing matters far more to Pyongyang than Moscow in the long term. I think there was a lot of misconception when ties between North Korea and Russia were warming after the first year of the Ukraine war, that Beijing was angry. And this, to me, is not accurate. China may have been uncomfortable, a little emetic, but it was certainly not angry. It continued to supply Russia with dual-use technologies, and it continued to help North Korea evade sanctions. And we are now seeing, as Dr. Go mentioned, repeated affirmations of traditional friendship ties between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, as if sort of the less tangible aspects of the economic relations are slowly trying to creep up back to pre-Ukraine and arguably pre-COVID levels. I mean, you have Xi Jinping congratulating Kim Jong-un on his re-election as General Secretary of the Workers' Party, at the Ninth Party Congress, for instance. I think, yes, Russia and China do not trust each other fully. But as we saw last September at the Victory Day parade in Beijing, the top two guests to be invited were by Xi Jinping, were Putin and Kim Jong-un. So I think on the part of North Korea, it wants to continue to sustain its economic ties with China, but also diversify and have strong relations with Russia, from which it can benefit, at least in the short to medium term.
So trilateral coordination would be expected, is expected to continue. Now, when we turn to the military picture, Dr. Howell, the U.S. intelligence community says North Korea continues to advance its nuclear and missile programs and is gaining combat experience through the support of Russia's war in Ukraine. How advanced would you think North Korea's military capabilities are today?
So estimates have shown that North Korea has between 40 to 50 nuclear warheads. It has enough fissile material to create around 80 to 90. And we've already seen in statements only this week, North Korea outline a pledge to increase its GDP spending on defense, for instance. I think the most important point here is that Pyongyang, under Kim Jong-un at the present time, wants to expand not just the sophistication of its conventional and nuclear arsenal and delivery systems, but also the scope. So we have Kim Jong-un making very clear in statements after the recent Party Congress, short-range tactical nuclear weapons, solid fuel ICBMs, land attack cruise missiles, drones, AI drones. Now, this is nothing new. We saw this being outlined very clearly at the last Party Congress in January 2021. But also, North Korea's ambitions conventionally, the Navy, the Air Force, even going into space as well. So I think when we speak of North Korea's capabilities, in addition to focusing on the scope and sophistication, we also need to look at the cyber domain. 40 to 50% of Pyongyang's WMD programs are funded by cyber warfare and specifically cryptocurrency hacks. I mean, go back to February last year and we saw the $1.5 billion hack of Bybit. So I think moving forward, however and whenever the Ukraine war ends, the relationship with Russia isn't going to go away, and we need to start looking at this, not just in terms of mutual defense, which we saw in the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty of June 2024, but we also need to look at Articles 9 and 10 of that treaty, expanding cooperation, including in AI and even information technology sectors. So when we analyze and examine Pyongyang's capabilities, it is much, much broader than just conventional and nuclear capabilities as well. And this is clearly part of Kim Jong-un's intention and plan moving forward.
Right, so it's definitely advancing both militarily and also in terms of cyber skills, and it's really a big concern for all of us. And we'll have to watch closely into the latest developments coming out from the regime. But as for now, we will have to leave our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Dr. Howell.
Thank you very much. It was very good to be here.
And of course, Dr. Go, we appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right.